Europe figured this out decades ago. Most of their trucks run disc brakes, front and rear. Better stopping power, less heat, shorter distances. Meanwhile, in America, the country with the most trucks on the road, roughly 90% of heavy rigs are still stopping with drum brakes. The same basic design that Louis Renault patented in 1902. So what's going on? Is America behind? Is Europe overcomplicating things? Or is this one of those situations where the answer is more boring and more honest than anyone wants to admit? This is why American trucks still use drum brakes, and why that might not change anytime soon. First, let's get the basics out of the way, because this matters. Drum brakes work exactly like they sound. There's a metal drum attached to the wheel. Inside that drum, brake shoes press outward against the inner surface when you hit the pedal. Friction slows the wheel. Simple, enclosed, cheap to build. Disc brakes work differently. There's a flat rotor spinning with the wheel, and a caliper squeezes brake pads against both sides of that rotor to slow it down. The whole thing sits out in the open air, exposed, visible, and much better at getting rid of heat. And heat is really what this whole debate comes down to. Here's the physics. Brakes work by converting the energy of a moving vehicle into heat. The faster you're going, the heavier the load, the more heat gets generated. On a loaded semi doing 65 miles per hour down a 7% mountain grade, you're generating enormous amounts of heat every single time that driver touches the pedal. Drum brakes trap that heat inside the drum. Discs sit in open air and shed heat continuously. That's why brake fade, where your brakes start losing effectiveness because they're too hot, is a much bigger problem with drums than with discs. According to NHTSA data, disc brakes shorten stopping distances by up to 20% compared to drums under repeated braking. On a 40-ton truck at highway speed, 20% shorter stopping distance is the difference between a close call and a catastrophe. So if discs stop better, handle heat better, and are easier to inspect, why is 90% of America's truck fleet still running drums? One word: money. Drum brakes are generally less expensive and less difficult to maintain and repair, and that matters enormously in an industry as price-sensitive as trucking. We're talking about an industry where profit margins are razor thin, fuel costs are unpredictable, and operators are managing fleets of 50, 100, 500 trucks at a time. Air disc brakes cost more, and operators need time to get a proper payback on that investment. For a small fleet running local routes on flat roads, drums work fine and cost less. Changing that calculation across an entire fleet of trailers and tractors runs into millions of dollars. And here's the part that really locks things in. You can't run a disc brake tractor with a drum brake trailer without creating braking imbalance problems. To truly switch, you'd need to convert both, and most trailers in America are old, cheap, and nowhere near worth the cost of a brake conversion. So how did Europe get there? Regulation. That's it. The European Union mandated electronic braking systems, EBS, on new heavy trucks. And EBS works significantly better with disc brakes. So manufacturers building for the European market switched. Volvo, Mercedes, DAF, all running discs standard. America took a different approach. The FMCSA tightened stopping distance requirements for heavy trucks a few years ago, and the industry responded not by switching to discs, but by building bigger, better drum brakes. Steer axle drums went from 15 by 4 inches to 16.5 by 5. Drive axles got even larger. They engineered their way around the problem without changing the fundamental technology. Is that stubborn? Maybe, but it worked. At least well enough to pass the regulations. Here's where things get interesting. The industry isn't completely frozen. Most new trucks now come with disc brakes on the front steer axle, where braking force matters most, while keeping drums on the rear drive axles to control costs. It's a hybrid approach, not perfect, but a step. In severe duty applications, garbage trucks, construction, refuse fleets, disc brake adoption has grown faster, because in those situations, the maintenance payback is real. Changing disc pads takes 15 minutes. Changing drum shoes takes almost an hour. When you've got a fleet of garbage trucks doing 200 stops a day in city traffic, that time adds up fast. The slow shift is happening. It's just happening on American terms, driven by economics, not mandates. So, is America behind or just practical? Honestly, both, depending on who you ask. The physics are clear. Disc brakes stop better. They handle heat better. They're easier to inspect and faster to service. Europe made the call, and their roads are safer for it. But America's trucking industry runs on margins so tight that saving $800 per axle on a 500 truck fleet is a real business decision. And until regulators force the issue, or fuel and labor costs make the math work differently, drum brakes aren't going anywhere. The answer isn't ignorance, it's economics. And that's usually the most American answer there is. If you learned something today, hit subscribe. We break down the stuff the automotive world doesn't talk about enough. See you in the next one.